Hello, and welcome back to the Diogenes Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Willingham, and together we will chew our way through Wokistan in search of an honest man, or woman, or they, them. I'm just kidding. There's nothing honest about any of that. Remember, if you enjoy the content here on the Diogenes Podcast, please like and subscribe and tell your friends to join the pack. Also, share your thoughts in the comments section, but remember to do so respectfully. We believe in free speech here on the Diogenes Podcast, but slurs are not arguments, and trolling is not a meaningful contribution to discourse. Besides, it's my fucking job. Today, I'll share another selection from my forthcoming book, Emphatic Caprices. This section is entitled Artemis Unbound, and it is twice timely in its examination of the ongoing process of cultural feminization alongside the identitarian revisionism that is unraveling Western narratives. So without further ado, Artemis Unbound. It was always the women, and above all the young ones, who were the most bigoted adherents of the party, the swallowers of slogans, the amateur spies, and nosers out of unorthodoxy. George Orwell, 1984. Part 1. Wokeism is a conspicuously sexed ideology. Western women are increasingly and overwhelmingly left liberal, and in the U.S. have unapologetically declared that, quote, the Democratic Party is the women's party, end quote, even while refusing to define what a woman is. When, in an interview with the New York Times' Maureen Dowd, strategist James Carville pushed back against the Dems' refusal to appeal to male voters in 2024, quote, 48% of people that vote are males. Do you mind if they have some consideration? End quote. The response from Anna Greenberg at The Hill was that Carville's quote-unquote profound misunderstanding was born of quote-unquote old-school chauvinism, of a piece with quote-unquote shockingly sexist ideas, the kind advanced by Tea Party Republicans. This in spite of the fact that Carville has been a strategist for the Democratic Party since the 1970s and was instrumental in the election of Bill Clinton in 1992. These sentiments correlate with a specific subset of women voters, namely the white and highly educated. Quote, as they've grown in numbers, college graduates have instilled increasingly liberal norms while gaining the power to nudge the Democratic Party to the left. Partly as a result, large portions of the party's traditional working-class base have defected to the Republicans, end quote. Yes, they have, as the 2024 re-election of Donald Trump shows clearly. But it is not simply a matter of education, but of the fact that, quote, college-educated women have distinctive views on many cultural questions, especially on issues of reproductive health, LGBT rights, and gender equality, end quote. Indeed, and they are decidedly dismissive of any concerns that conflict with their power-driven values. Especially telling is that among this group, more than 70% believe that the U.S. has not only failed to make progress in giving women rights equal to men, but that women have actually lost ground over the last few decades. These beliefs are strongest among American women ages 18 to 39, and among self-identified liberals, men and women alike. The consensus is that girls and women face greater threats and challenges to their success than boys and men, all evidence to the contrary. Now, where do we suppose they got these impressions? Women professionally dominate in key institutional areas, especially in human resources, psychotherapy, and education. In the latter domain, women are the supermajority in the area studies: feminist, gender, queer, post-colonial, critical race, fat and disability, etc., out of which wokeness arose and through which it has birthed and delivered generations of deranged activists, hypervigilant inquisitors, and ecstatic flagellants. Women increasingly dominate the arts and entertainment, journalism, and the law, utilizing them strategically as activist platforms. Women are far and away the most politically outspoken demographic. Any casual scan of social or mainstream media readily reveals this to be the case. Although feelings about the fact vary widely, there is little disagreement that educated elites control the culture, and there is no doubt that progressively minded white women chair the educated elite. There is clear industry-based evidence of the sex-based bifurcation in media that is deepening our cultural division. According to an internal review of media by the Writers Guild of America, the Inclusion and Equity Report of 2022, while men comprise most of the staff in television production, the storytelling, narratives, and increasing majority of on-screen characters, staff writers, editors, and executive story editors are women. In this configuration, men's roles are primarily organizational and promotional, with women controlling the messaging and content received by the audience. While there may be a monetary differential between these respective roles in creation and production, there is also a starkly disproportionate influence on the cultural discourse and the values and identifications promoted by female writers through their ideological priorities and preferences. This reveals the cognitive dissonance over ongoing claims of oppressive patriarchy versus actual cultural practice. Continued cries of underrepresentation rise amidst a torrent of cultural production skewed toward feminist self-interests, malformed male characterization, and increasing deracination of men, even within their own stories, superfluous social justice box-checking, gratuitous and politically motivated race and gender swapping in beloved classics and historical dramas, and unrelenting mid-wit moralizing that converts every narrative into narcotizing agitprop. These dynamics parallel larger geopolitical applications of power and influence throughout the West. Hard power, military force and economic leverage, and soft power, the cultural narratives and manipulation of images and representations that, wielded effectively, void the need for overt force or economic sanction. This is the velvet glove of social justice, those caressed by its ideological enticements shivering with pleasure at the thought of a fairer world. And those who have been ideologically captured, or better enraptured, by compelling and confirming images will comply without resistance as long as they continue to be entertained. Shades of Brave New World. These are conspicuously sexed strategies for dominance, and with media technologies sufficiently sophisticated and ubiquitous to level the playing field, and with the vast majority of new marketing graduates being women and 60% of extant marketing professionals being female, it is rather obvious which side is winning the battle of the sexed culture. And their messages are loud and clear. Far be it from me to mansplain when women are so willing and able to speak for themselves. This country is a racist, transphobic, homophobic, xenophobic, ableist, classicist, Islamophobic, misogynistic dumpster fire. As such, seeing the American flag makes me want to vomit. This was breathlessly uncommon in the original, presumably to convey urgency, which was so fast and sudden I mispronounced classist as classicist, but you get the picture. White supremacy is white people dominating the discourse about white supremacy in the mainstream media without acknowledging how they are upholding white supremacy in the process. Lacking the grammatical panache to utilize anaphora or epistrophe, white supremacy is here reduced to a mere filler phrase. Now make me a sandwich. White women are the greatest villains of all time. It must be devastating not to be able to hide behind your husbands. It seems to me that assuming that all white women are straight or married, probably to white men, is just bigotry. It's time to criminalize white women. Period. Lock them up. Well, if they're just going to get the lady dick in prison anyway, how is this really a punishment? Make a banner about ending whiteness. March against whiteness. Rally against whiteness. Raise your megaphone against whiteness. Take to the streets against whiteness. This sounds like a Ben & Jerry's sales pitch. Issuing blanket denouncements and encouraging hostile public displays based on race. Are there white sheets involved? Now, these examples are from one obviously very disgruntled customer. Crustomer, that's better. The irrepressible Syra Rao. So it is important not to generalize from such a small, albeit highly vocal, batshit sample. But ever since her star turn in Matt Walsh's comic hit piece, Am I a Racist?, I just can't stop thinking about her. Any woman who has found a way to charge people $5,000 for a dinner intended to be quote-unquote uncomfortable and painful, as they are berated for being racist, has balls worthy of admiration. And the fact that she married a guy named after an inmate's makeshift weapon of choice, Shiv, is just too perfect. I wonder where his balls are, and also, what's that on my dinner plate? Another ballsy bullseye comes from the New York Times and the Washington Post columnist Taylor Lorenz. In a CNN interview, Lorenz, whose name derives from the Latin word for laurel, which is synonymous with victory, sang the praises of murderer Luigi Mangione. Luigi, whose name in Italian means renowned warrior, killed United Healthcare CEO, husband and father of two, Brian Thompson, on December 2nd, 2024, by publicly shooting him in the back in broad daylight with a homemade 3D printed gun. In the interview, Lorenz describes a cold-blooded murderer as handsome and a morally good guy. She then defends her view of Mangione as a righteous avenger by claiming that her hot take led to a massive spike in her social media ratings as a reflection of public support for homicide in the name of social justice. Quote, "You're going to see women especially who feel like, oh my God, right? Like, here's this man who's a revolutionary, who's famous, who's handsome, who's young, who's smart. He's a person who seems like this morally good man, which is hard to find," end quote. A revolutionary? This insane spin is followed with hearty laughter from Lorenz and the Irish soft boy interviewer, who adds, "I just realized that women will literally date an assassin before they swipe right on me. That's for real, yeah." Followed by more cackles by the two of them. The interviewer continues, comparing support for Mangione to support for Trump, a perplexing support, he implies, born out of desperation at the failure of social and political institutions to address public concerns. Lorenz concurs. Quote, "They want somebody to take on the system. They want somebody to tear down these barbaric establishment institutions," end quote. Notice the threat inflation. Not unethical profiteering from a single company or an economic sector that could be checked and corrected through better governmental policies and protections, but a malevolent system that must be completely destroyed. And the horrendous false equivalence of celebrating a killer with a ghost gun, who's seen as a necessary corrective to those voting for an orange goblin. In the wake of the controversial CNN interviewer, a poster on X addressed Lorenz, writing that Brian Thompson, quote, "didn't deserve to get murdered in cold blood," end quote. The brave little Taylor's response? Quote, "Yes, he did, and it should have happened sooner. Every single person profiting off of and making decisions that lead to people dying from lack of health care would suffer a trial and jail time at the least if we lived in a country with actual justice, but this is what we get," end quote. Emphasis in original. So, since things are not perfect, let's do away with them immediately by any means possible. Since there's no time to waste on effective error correction, let's just waste the people standing in our way. Upon reconsideration, this does actually sound very revolutionary, as in the Chinese Communist Revolution. Quote, "Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun," end quote, Mao said in 1927 at the dawn of the Chinese Civil War. In the Little Red Book, Mao wrote, quote, "The socialist system will eventually replace the capitalist system. This is an objective law independent of man's will. We do not want war, but war can only be abolished through war. And in order to get rid of the gun, it is necessary to take up the gun," end quote. Quote, "I'm speaking to the sentiment. People do want these executives dead. I'm with the people," end quote, said Taylor Lorenz a century later. And, contra Gil Scott-Heron, the revolution has been and will continue to be televised. Stay tuned. This just in, remember I wrote this in 2025, on May 21st, 2025, Israeli embassy staffers Yaron Lachinsky, age 30, and Sarah Milgram, age 26, were gunned down in cold blood outside an event at the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. The murderer, Elias Rodriguez, age 30, produced a keffiyeh before being apprehended by police and shouted, "Free! Free Palestine!" The couple were about to become engaged and were due to fly to Israel to meet Yaron Lachinsky's parents in just a few days. These young people had nothing whatsoever to do with the policies of the Israeli government or the war in Gaza. In fact, they were attending a multi-faith meeting on solving humanitarian crises in the Middle East and North Africa. No, they were murdered because the killer, a proud member of the Marxist Party for Socialism and Liberation, thought they were Jews. Yaron Lachinsky was actually a Christian. This happened on American soil. A radicalized fanatic pumped 21 rounds into 2 innocent people, finally killing Sarah Milgram by shooting her in the back as she tried to crawl away through a pool of her own blood. A radicalized fanatic shouting one of the hateful slogans heard on college campuses across the United States over the last few years. Globalize the Intifada. There is only one solution, Intifada revolution, from the river to the sea. This was an execution, and these aren't empty words. They are battle cries saturated with blood and originate in Hamas, an actual Islamic death cult. An Islamic death cult elected by the people of Palestine who continue to support Hamas despite the terrorists using them as human shields and building hundreds of miles of tunnels under schools and hospitals and even beneath the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestine refugees. These tunnels are used to house weapons and supplies for terrorist assaults, not to shelter Palestinian citizens from the warfare Hamas incites. Yet, in another smug and sadistic display of ideological contempt, a female blacktivist on CNN immediately pushed back on concerns with campus hate speech as an intensifier of, if not an incitement of, anti-Semitic sentiment and violence. When journalist Batya Ungar-Sargon called out, quote, a culture of dehumanizing Jews that is rampant on the left. Nobody wants to talk about it, but we need people on the left to say this is unacceptable, end quote. The panelist rejoined with a smirk, quote, did somebody say this was acceptable? Did I miss something? End quote, and then coughed out a derisive chuckle. Yes, you are missing something. Some fucking human decency, along with a moral compass, which it seems the left have traded away for the magic 8-ball of DEI, the oracular pronouncements of which always float up from the bottom of a murky stew of amorphous relativism. She then attempted to bait Ungar-Sargon. Quote, do you think everybody who chants Free Palestine wants to murder somebody? End quote, followed by another hateful rictus gotcha smile. Another leftist logical fallacy, falsely accusing someone of affirming the consequent to dodge a rational argument. The nonverbal reactions of this woman and another black female panelist were dripping with disdain, and the optics were very suggestive. A Jewish journalist surrounded by black pundits, not generally known for their sympathy for Semitic fellow travelers on the road to the Promised Land, along with the token white male, apparently mute. At least one of them knows his place. If Yaron Lachinsky and Sarah Milgram were killed because they were identified as Jews, then Ungar-Sargon is here repudiated because she is identified as white. In grievance culture, all victims are equal, but some are more equal than others. Had this been a black couple gunned down outside the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History by a man donning a white hood and shouting, "For God, race, and nation!" months of rioting would ensue, our entire society would be subject to immediate overhaul, and such antecedent statements would never have been allowed on a single college campus. Here the brute harpies make their nest the same, who from the Strophides the Trojan band drove with dire boding of their future woe. This ominous narration is from Canto 13 of Dante's Inferno, but recent matrifocal attacks on Western culture are anything but a divine comedy. Distressingly, Dante's evocation concerns his passage through the 7th circle of hell, a pathless wood where Virgil, his poet guide, warns him against the confusion of his senses. Hearing cries of agony but seeing no one present, Dante dismembers a tree limb at Virgil's urging, dismayed at the blood pouring forth. Only then does he learn that imprisoned in the trees are the souls of suicides, forever bound to hell, where harpies nest in their boughs, feeding on their leaves, inflicting eternal torment. In our world, these might as well be the groves of Academe, the marbled halls of the polis, or the mythic passes of the living theater. In each of these sacred precincts, good men and women and true liberals have self-destructed and willfully given over control of the culture to spiteful monsters who, lacking the gifts to create anything new and truly wonderful, perch in the higher reaches, feeding on the leavings of their betters. For example, Emily Wilson's quote-unquote fresh and authoritative, or so claims Amazon, woke translation of Homer's The Odyssey is a paradigmatic example of the debasement of Western civilization by spiteful ideologues. Not content merely to turn up their noses or push away from the table when offended, harpy-like, they spread their foul stench over the whole culture, poisoning our collective appetites or snatching away what sustains us. Just for shits and googles, the AI Gemini overview states, quote, Emily Wilson's translation brings attention to the poem's androcentric values and the inequalities between characters, end quote. This is not translation, it is revision, converting literature into ideological evidence used to marshal a case against men as the traditional enemies of equality. On X, one librarian mama lists herself as parent, partner, librarian, she, her, hashtag faithfully LGBTQ+. Her channel posts quote-unquote mandatory content consisting of quote-unquote indiscriminate tweets about, among other things, quote, feminism, activism, and gorgeous people of all shapes, sizes, colors, and genders, end quote. On Wilson's Odyssey of Revision, librarian Mama writes, quote, oh, you've never read the Odyssey? Your timing is perfect. Emily Wilson's translation is the best one in literally ages, has that sweet iambic pentameter to give it a bouncy feel, and makes dude bros cry that the classics have gone woke, end quote. Literally literature. How librarily librarian. But how is a middle school cafeteria taunt a recommendation? Bouncy sounds vaguely copulatory, or is it just fat positive? Mama's X icon in the humanities, spelled like the corpulent sea mammal, suggests the latter. Oh, the huge manatee of it all. And while Wilson's translation is in iambic pentameter, between the, quote, Charybdis of artifice and the Scylla of slang, end quote, as she put it, Homer's epic poems are in dactylic hexameter, also known as heroic meter. Not that Mama's deeds are ever heroic, except maybe at the supper table. And remember, a world without a hero is just ick. The accompanying portrait of author Emily Wilson may be worth 1,000 words, even if it is unlikely to launch 1,000 ships. Plain and severe with a dead-eyed stare, replete with borderline glasses and slathered in tattoos of writhing creatures, Wilson could double as a shield ornament for Athena if Medusa's head ever falls off. Oh wait, it already did. That would make Emily Wilson an apotropaion. Let's say it together. Apotropaion. Apotropaion. A fearsome face intended to ward off harm or evil influences. In other words, a defensive bitch. And remember, her initials are EW. That's pronounced ew. Wilson's deflationary translation is no epic and is as lost as the titular hero when it comes to eloquence. Let's compare her opening verse to classic translations. Robert Fitzgerald, sing in me, muse, and through me tell the story of that man skilled in all ways of contending. T.E. Lawrence, divine poesy, goddess daughter of Zeus, sustain for me the song of the various-minded man. Robert Fagles, sing to me of the man, muse, that man of twists and turns. Emily Wilson, tell me about a complicated man. So a man skilled in all ways of contending, a various-minded man, a man of twists and turns driven time and again off course, is now just complicated. Not resourceful, not capable of many perspectives, not compelled by fate to follow an unforeseeable destiny and adapt creatively to risk, but instead reduced to a Facebook relationship status selection. Ambivalence is hardly an auspicious beginning for an epic, and in modern media speak, complicated is synonymous with problematic, implying that this guy's more trouble than he's worth, except apparently as an object of derision. Wilson has been quoted as saying that her project, quote, is making visible the cracks in the patriarchal fantasy, end quote. Once assailing a stronghold on the proud height of Troy, in response to the abduction of a married woman, Wilson's Odysseus wrecks a holy town, as colonizing patriarchs are wont to do, one supposes. This sounds a bit like Gaza, where the town is more sacred than the abducted Israeli girls and women raped and dismembered there. Formerly ached in agony and fighting to save his life and bring his comrades home, Wilson plunks, quote, he failed to keep them safe, end quote, like a stone in the ocean. Destination, rock bottom. More masculine uselessness. Telling the old story for modern times, Wilson herself fails to lift the great song again and make the tale live for us in all its many bearings, because her strength is reserved solely for throwing her own feminist weight around, and she can see only in one direction, homing in on the masculine as monstrosity with a precision and opportunistic timeliness Odysseus would have envied. Speaking of timeliness, I wrote the foregoing section for Emphatic Caprices early in 2025, well ahead of the current controversy over director Christopher Nolan's production of the Odyssey, which is based on Emily Wilson's translation. This masterpiece of twists and turns features a race-swapped Helen of Troy, the black actress also doubling as her sister, Clytemnestra. That's two counter-colonizations of the Western canon. It also features a 5'1", 85-pound transgender alien Pudge portraying the greatest Greek hero of the Trojan War, presumably because depression really is rage turned inward, and now that the slicin' and dicin' has been completed on Ellen of Troy, it's time for imperishable glory in hacking up what's left of Western literature. And an incongruously black bardic narrator who is played by the auto-tuned mediocrity Travis Scott, famous mostly for continuing to float his tropes while people were crushed to death at his concert. This sounds more Roman than Greek to me. Nolan's explanation for this last casting choice is a desire to draw a parallel between ancient Greek oral poetry and modern black rhythmic storytelling. Well, Homer did begin the Iliad with the rap of Achilles, but somehow I think this is just another sop to Cerberus offered by guilty white liberals consumed with oikophobic self-loathing for their own cultural heritage. Alas, Nolan and his Trojan horse thems have succumbed to the spellbinding sirens of the woke cult and drowned themselves, along with the rest of us, in its churning ideology. Quote, whoever draws too close, off guard, catching the sirens' voices in the air, no wife and children will welcome him home. No joyful children will climb upon his knees, because the sirens will enchant him with their high-pitched song. End quote. That was Circe to Odysseus in the Odyssey, Book 12. Wilson's crisis-mongering introduction to her 2023 translation of Homer's The Iliad is indeed admirably clear in rendering her intent, which is apparently to inflict unmitigated misery on the reader by linking the wrath of a fictional Bronze Age hero with the equally imaginary world-ending horror of modern Western cis-heteropatriarchy, as if we need another version of a 15-year-old autistic girl's catastrophizing. Wilson writes, quote, we are now in a period of crisis, not for a specific nation, but for humanity inhabiting a planet that is becoming less and less habitable. A new kind of heartbreak can be felt in the Iliad's representation of a city in its last days, of triumphs and defeats and struggles and speeches that will take place in a city that will soon be burned to the ground, in a landscape that will soon be flooded by all the rivers, in a world where soon no people will live at all and there will be no more stories and no more names. You already know the story. You will die. Everyone you love will also die. You will lose them forever. You will be sad and angry. You will weep. You will bargain. You will make demands. You will beg. You will pray. It will make no difference. Nothing you can do will bring them back. You know this. This poem will make you understand this unfathomable truth again and again, as if for the very first time." End quote. Through her monotonous prose and the abuse of the imperative mood that makes this sound like an angsty adolescent's entry on the Backrooms wiki, Wilson's harangue achieves what one must surmise is her true goal, an experience of quote-unquote intimate alienation intended to discomfit readers who, when white males, are implicated not just in the sufferings described in the epic texts of Homer, but in the imminent demise of the entire biosphere. Describing Penelope in the Odyssey, Wilson observes, quote, "Her work is all about undoing," end quote. Yeah, we get that. From musicologist Susan McClary, we get this. The opening movement to Ludwig van Beethoven's towering Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy, is, quote, "the murderous rage of a rapist incapable of attaining release," end quote. Putting the cat in catastrophizing, McClary writes, quote, "The point of recapitulation in the first movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony unleashes one of the most horrifying violent episodes in the history of music," end quote. McClary asserts that desire in Beethoven's musical narratives, quote, "frequently culminates, as though necessarily, in explosive violence," end quote, and that this is what results in his work being received as, quote, "more serious, more virile, more consequential," end quote, than other composers. Poor Schroeder. He'll never win Lucy's affections now. Oh, wait. He didn't want them. Call him MGTOW, but the kid could fucking play. Quote, "Explosive rage fuels most of the remainder of the symphony," end quote, and the third movement offers only false respite from the quote-unquote monomania of the preceding two, a semblance of quote-unquote tenderness and vulnerability that remains disturbingly unreal and unattainable, because in Western culture it is understood that, quote, "to linger in that pleasurable, structurally and semiotically feminine zone would be an act of intolerable transgression that, for proper patriarchal subjects, is to be utterly damned," end quote. Ultimately, lovely Ludwig van's quote-unquote gargantuan masterpiece, evocative of Alex DeLarge from A Clockwork Orange, withholds its promised thematic resolution as the composer, quote, "simply forces closure by bludgeoning the cadence and the piece to death," end quote. Well, McClary certainly bludgeons her piece to death, along with the reader, in what presents as a perverse narcissistic reversal of the Ludovico technique from Kubrick's vivid cinematic depiction of Burgess's novel, a Pavlovian association of, in this case, an ideologically problematic and therefore unacceptable form of expression, Beethoven, with unambiguously heinous behavior, oppression, rape, and murder. Instead of the music being incidentally associated with our conditioning against ultraviolence, horrific fantasies of sexual abuse are evoked intentionally to poison our pleasure in the music and, by extension, in Western civilization itself. Which makes one wonder, if they're reading Lolita in Tehran, are they listening to Beethoven in Palestine? The rest, as they say, is silence, which, as the woke often note, is violence. Let's give McClary the last word here. Quote, "Beethoven resists the exigencies of formal necessity in the first and final movements of the Ninth, but finally embraces and perpetuates them, and even raises them to a much higher level of violence. And once his successors in the 19th century tasted that combination of desire and destruction, they could not get enough of it," end quote. Tune in next week for part 2 of Artemis Unbound. I'm Chris. Thanks for joining me, and don't let the woke steal your fire.